You may not know it, but the weekend of October 20th through the 22nd, 2017 was historic, important even. That is when the first ever Gauntlet Con, an online gaming convention hosted by the Gauntlet RPG community, happened. In addition to about 100 games, check the Gauntlet YouTube channel for them, there were 10 panel discussions driven and led by Gauntlet community members. You're about to hear the panel, How to Be a Great Player, featuring Yoshi Creelman, Sherri Stewart, and Patrick Knowles. Enjoy.
Hey, this is Yoshi Creelman, and welcome to How to Be a Great Player. I'm here with two awesome players, Sherri Stewart and Patrick Knowles. We're going to be talking about the tips and tricks of being a good player. I know there's a lot of panels out there who talk about being a masterclass GM, but sometimes there's other players at the table, and that's kind of what we're focusing on here. My name's Yoshi, and I've been playing games for a long time. One of the things that I really like about being a player is just being able to participate and enjoy with other things. It's really great to see other players shine and being able to give opportunities for that. So kind of with that, I'm going to pass it off to the other panel guests here. Sherri, do you want to tell us maybe a little bit about yourself and what's a memorable character that you've had and what made them memorable?
Okay. Well, let's see here. I married my GM 20-some years ago because I recognized immediately what my priority in life should be after I played a few games with him. And so since then, I've been playing. And the last few years, we've been playing online with people. And this last year, joined the Gauntlet, have a chance to play so many more games and systems and meet so many more players. And it's been a fabulous growing time. And so I am a work in progress on the player side, but I've been enjoying that so much. And I had to say my favorite character was one that I made up. I came up with this dumb name and it just popped out. And I said, the name of my character has to be Rudapest Soul Run. And as soon as I said it, I felt like an idiot, except that all the other players took it and ran. And it was a whole thing of all their names were all boring and everything. And it was just... It was like this character that I just absolutely loved because they just embraced it immediately and it made the whole game just wonderful. And so to me, that's my most memorable character, just because it was part of a whole, part of a wonderful game that felt warm and crazy and full of desperate moments. And yeah, so that's what you hope for when you have a game.
Awesome.
I loved Rudapest, by the way. She was amazing.
Fantastic. Patrick, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe a character that was memorable for you?
So, funnily enough, I have a similar story, except that before I married my GM, he was my bartender. Then he became my GM. But I've been playing since college, and mostly in person and mostly with the same people, especially for the last 10 years or so. It's a lot of people I went to school with and some local friends and things like that. And we tend to have really long-term campaign games that go in the 6 or more year range. But my husband and I, we joined Gauntlet recently, 6 months ago, so something like that. And it's been great just getting to interact with people and getting exposed to a whole bunch more games than a gaming lifestyle where you play 6-year-long campaigns allows you. Because that's great to dig into one game, but not really to try all the new things that have come out in the years since you started. But also just to get to play with new people who do things that I don't expect and have experiences that I hadn't even thought of to bring into games has been really great. One of my characters recently that I really liked was in Lowell's Veil game, and it was JB, and I was playing the Onomastic playbook, which is it's a playbook that brings a lot of extra fiction into the game. You have these black-hatted bad guys who are hunting you down and have exterminated all of your friends, and they're still coming after you, and they control some part of society. It's a playbook that brings a lot of weight into the story and sort of shifts things from what other people may be expecting when they come in. But in this particular case, Lowell and the other players even more so, they ran with it during character creation. They just willingly, without me prompting them, tied their stories into bits and pieces of my character's big complicated backstory. And as we went through the game, like they a lot of times chose to portray the weirdnesses and intricacies of their character through the spotlight of what was going on with my playbook. And that made me feel so great, especially having come in like worried about that, because I knew it was a playbook that could shift things. And there are certain playbooks like that in certain games that you just have to acknowledge they're going to change how things go. And no one even batted an eyelash. That was great.
Awesome. Good to hear. So when you start like a new game, like a new campaign, whether it's a long-term campaign or a con or like a one-shot or something like that, what's one of those things, what's a one or two things that maybe you do to help like prep yourself for the game? I know for me personally, one of the things that I like to do is just look for character portraits. So like I have like some Pinterest pages or Google images and stuff like that kind of give me like a visual image that I can kind of like tie something to. So like it gives me an idea of what the character is. Even if I don't know anything else, it gives me something to start off with that I find interesting and helpful for myself. Sherri, what about yourself?
I have a thing of, I play in a lot of games, and I play long games and short games. And so a lot of times for me, when I'm walking into a game session, I have to stop and make a quick inventory of where I am as a person. Like, am I having a low energy day or a high energy day? And then I kind of set my goals for what I'm walking into based on that. So if I'm going into a long-term learning game and things have been happening, then maybe I have to read up and kind of recall what all the things are that are happening and all that stuff. But if I'm going into a one shot, and then do I need to know the system? Do I have the energy to know the system? Or am I going to play, real light and take this, the simplest character? So I do a lot of self-inventory before I do that. But yeah, pictures are awesome, aren't they? They really help you bring a character together fast.
How about yourself, Patrick?
I wanted to say, Sherri, that's super clever, because I rarely do that sort of introspection, especially like if I'm running home to get to a game or something like that. And there have definitely been times I find myself in the middle of a session like reacting badly to what's going on, and it's because I didn't sit down and like untangle what I was going through beforehand and got into some sort of like tense situation with another character. Then it goes weird places. I definitely need to start doing that. What I tend to do personally, especially if I'm coming back to a game, whether it's like a short campaign of just a couple sessions or whether it's something longer, is I try to choose one of the other characters, ideally like someone that I haven't had much interaction or story with thus far. And I look at our relationship and what's happened between us, and I try and imagine how I want to move that relationship forward in some way, whether it's like making it more positive or whether it's making an antagonistic relationship even more so, or whether it's just like completely flipping what's going on its head. And I try and imagine one scene that might come up or one sort of interaction that might come up in the game that would sort of move things that way. And that way, even if the game session never goes anywhere near to that sort of scene I imagined, it gives me something to base off of, so that when we get to somewhere that's sort of close or somewhere where that idea could slot in, I have a sort of planned conception of like, oh, okay, here I want to get in right now and press this button real quick before the story moves on to something else. And it's I like keeping things shifting that way.
Cool. Kind of along those lines of keeping things shifting with players, because you mentioned like tying it with the player. Do you talk with them and like out of character, like, hey, I have this idea for this thing that we could do, or is this more like of an in character type stuff?
If I get the opportunity, it definitely works out better if I can, between sessions or right before, or even just in a break, be like, hey, what do you think about this sort of interaction between us? Because especially online where you can't give a lot of subtle cues and have some side chatter, I find that when I just try to naturally steer the story that way, like it fails almost more often than it works. And that ends up leaving me frustrated. So yeah, I've definitely started to try and think along the lines of, like, if I have something clear in my mind, I need to make it clear in at least one other person's mind so that I have an ally in moving forward with that story.
Awesome. Good. But you bring up something great, and I think we can maybe shift to this, is like, there's both online play and like face-to-face play. How does that kind of like what the setting that you're in, whether it's a loud convention hall, somebody's living room, or like an online game where you can be still in your PJs and be all right? Like, how does that change how you approach the game? Sherri, what about you?
You know, I found that online gaming, I love it because I get to play with so many different people, but I also hate it because I'm playing with so many different people, and all I can see is this little square over their face. I can't get any sense of their emotional space, their sort of all of their other interactions. And plus, every little ping in my house, every cat meow, everything that's going on in my house is adding this other thing to it. So it is a time of great concentration. I can barely take an online game that's like more than 2 hours. My concentration that's required for it is really high. But I've had some of the most awesome experiences, but they're a lot harder than a face-to-face game is. And with a convention, I think I tend to walk into it with a lot of anxiety. So for me, it's definitely a lot of going, just because it's getting there. Everything's fast. There's a schedule. It's moving. There's a lot of personalities that you kind of maybe know, maybe don't know, that you probably should know, all of these. So I had that sort of, talk myself into it. Again, I'm very much have to work through my sort of comfort level, and I very much have to decide what I want out of that game that I've chosen at a convention. Sometimes I'm going in to try the system. Sometimes I'm going in to sit with those people and play with them. And that's a kind of different thing that you're doing when you go in there. When you're playing the system, you're choosing something that's going to help you test it and try it and experiment with it, maybe a little bit more but also maybe if it's brand new to you, like the first few times I played a Powered by the Apocalypse game, I had to go with a super neutral character so that I could just kind of blank out everything else and go, what is the system doing? What am I supposed to be doing as a player in this game? So, you got that. And with conventions, you're more likely to hit that this is absolutely new to me situation.
Cool. How about yourself, Patrick? What are some of the things that you change?
So definitely one of the biggest changes for me between like face-to-face and online is the pacing difference. And like we started as friends started moving away and people got less convenient to play with in person. We started playing around with online stuff in our home group a long time ago, to the point where we started on a business conference phone, trying that. And there's so much more intentionality and slow pacing that you need to do in online as opposed to in face-to-face, where things can be a lot more spontaneous, and it's okay to talk over someone because people can still understand what's going on and things like that. Another thing is part of what Sherri was talking about there with just being able to read people or not being able to read people online. I've seen a couple of great people in the Gauntlet. I think like Rich Rogers stands out to me the most as sort of making sure that you give reactions that can be seen in that tiny little box on the bottom, and making sure that at times when you would just like quirk an eyebrow or just go, you instead do something like big and over the top so that your point gets across without you having to cut in vocally and stop what's going on. And it really does make a difference. Like when I see motion down there on the bottom and I look down and someone is like, or they're like, yeah, clapping, or just whatever they're doing to what's going on, or especially if I'm the one that's doing it, like suddenly it gets that camaraderie and that we're in the same space feeling across. Whereas so much of online play, and especially I feel like Apocalypse World channels into this a lot, ends up in being serialized one-on-one conversations. It's just you and the GM having a private conversation, and then we shift focus and see how this other person and the GM react to that private conversation, and continue like that. Where with that sort of body language and with bringing in other players, you can make sure to break up that sort of monotonous feel.
Yeah, that's super helpful. It's one of the things that like I try to do is like being that really expressive player and a lot of signals, but I also try to like bring that in like just face-to-face games, not just online for the little boxes. So like just being at a table, just like being able to lean into people. It's a little bit harder to do online. But like when at a table, just being able to lean in, or even just something as simple as just like readjusting your chair so like your shoulders are square to the person that like is there and talking, even if you're not part of the scene. Little things like that. One of my favorite things that I remember getting complimented on is me and another character, not even just another player. We were having like a in character argument, but like I kept like bringing my hand up and like just like no, keep going, like I like this argument, like just to make sure that like they knew like no, I know we're fighting, but like no, let's keep bringing this fight on. So all those things and anything you can do. I know this little box here makes it sometimes hard, but and like exactly what you're saying, being over expressive sometimes really, really helps with that. All right. So we got a couple of questions. So Adam Goldberg from the Discord says, how do you work on passing spotlight without necessarily working with the GM or DM here? So like, what are some ways that maybe you can like recognize other players who maybe who want a little bit more spotlight, and what can you do as a player to help with that? So like, I know for myself, things that I've noticed is a little bit of what we were just talking about of like, hey, I noticed that so-and-so wasn't really participating, is I'll turn my chair and my shoulders to them and ask them a question of like, hey, do you want to like go with, even if it's out of character question, it'll be like, hey, my character's going to go do this thing. I think it'd be really great. You compliment the thing that I'm missing on this thing. You want to come with me to do this. So that's one thing that I do. Sherri, do you got any tips or tricks for that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I try to do is actually with that explicitly going, okay, I'm going to do this thing, and even my character recognizes that I need you to help me. So it is very much that sort of thing of going, okay, so here's my explanation. I'm going to talk at you really fast. I'm going to drag you into this, whether you want it or not, and then we can have that little bargaining scene or whatever, and then we're off to the races, hopefully. There's always my hope. I prefer pulling someone in rather than trying to finagle a situation that they'll recognize that they're supposed to enter into. That's a little bit harder and a little bit more indirect. You get someone who's too polite, they're not going to catch on. and it's just because they're being polite, not because they're not smart. It's that they're going, oh, this is, their turn. So that's awesome. That's about all I got.
Cool. Patrick, do you got anything else?
As far as like recognizing that someone else maybe needs some more engagement that they're getting, I think going back to that granted limited view into body language that you have, but the nice part about these little online windows is that they focus just on someone's face. So it becomes really easy to tell if someone is like staring in, reacting at the right time, engaged, or whether you see like the side of their face or the top of their head a lot, or if they look like they're obviously like looking through different things, and if you can see them start to disconnect from what's going on, that's a great sign that it's been too long since someone talked to them. And so along with like Sherri was saying of bringing people in, which I do think is the smoothest sort of way, rather than you trying to physically shift the scene that when the GM isn't expecting it, like trying to bring someone else into the scene is the smoothest way, I think. And one thing that I've been trying to do, because this definitely falls under the banner of things I'm not great at, is not make complete solutions. You know, one of the things that like hits that button in my brain for role playing is solving the complicated thing, or seeing how we can use our resources to approach this particular problem. But recently I've realized that can be a problem sometimes, and to try and moderate myself to where I intentionally come up with flawed or incomplete plans, where I say like, I've got this seed of an idea and maybe we could go this direction. Hey, you Sherri, why don't you come in? What, like I share this sort of half idea with you. Can you help me figure out these holes that I can't get past? And even if like I'm in my brain going, well, I know I do it this way and this way and this way. It brings in someone else and gets them talking and interested in what I want to do. And B, it makes what I was going to come up with more complex and more interesting than if it had just come out of my brain alone.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good to hear. That sort of dovetails into a question that Adrian Toon was asking in the Discord. He was saying that, what are some tips that you can help with yourself to avoid like backseat GMing? And this is not just for a GM, I would say, but also like playing somebody else's character or another GM when you might be thinking, oh, I would know how I would do this. You're talking, Patrick, about asking questions and like letting them lead on things. What are some other ways that maybe you can help move the story and get people incorporated and keep them together without necessarily overstepping any bounds or anything like that? Sherri, you got some ideas?
Well, you know, I have a GM that I know super well, and I know all of his tells. And so when I hit a new GM, that new GM is confusing to me very often the first time. I'm like listening for the word that means that thing or whatever, and I'm not hearing it. And there is a sort of thing of going, well, why isn't he doing this thing that my husband always does, right? And so actually what I do is I actually spend a lot of time being the kind of goofy person at the table that asks questions. It goes, okay, so I want to do this. So how do we do? And I have the GM talk me through. At least I get an idea of what they expect is supposed to happen or how it goes. Because I think it is really hard to be familiar with games and play games a lot and not go, oh, there's a different way to do that. Of course there is. There's a different way. So you gotta try to figure out how the two of you cross paths. Does that make any sense? So ask questions, let them answer it. And in your question, try to say, this is what I want to do. This is my intent. This is how I'm hoping this will happen. If you give them the arc of your intent, then they at least have something that they can guide their answer by instead of trying to guess what you want from them.
Awesome. Great advice. Patrick, do you have anything else you would like to add? I know you started it off sort of.
Just in the idea of similarly like modeling with questions there, I think that's a great idea to sort of lean into sticky points in the system and figure out how this new GM is going to react. I also like, especially during character creation, trying to point some characters or questions at the other characters as well, as people are sort of settling into their characters, and I come up with something that It's like, hey, I wonder how this particular aspect of their character falls out. Like, I'll try to slip in a player-to-player question there that's like, well, what does this mean for your character? And I think one of the ways to avoid like backseat GMing there, because that definitely falls under the staying engaged at the table and just being a good play environment. But to avoid like the backseat GMing, I really try and after that bite down on my tongue and not do like the natural follow-up questions to their response. I try and just lay out sort of a seed of my interest and see where that goes, and not try and steer the whole conversation myself.
Yeah, I know that same sentiment of trying to bite your tongue at those questions and letting them answer. I feel you on that one. But along those ideas of like character creation, when you're like either banking a character for a one shot or a long term game, or even just like selecting a character from like pre-gens at a con or something like that, what are some of the things that kind of like draw you to certain characters, or what are things that you look for, and how do you like maybe? What are some of the reasons? Like, I know for me, I usually like to look for things like flaws or like personality quirks or things that sort of match what me personally are like, so that I can kind of like lean into them to make an interesting character. Sherri, what are some things you look for?
Okay, so I'm a trad player from way back, which means that I am a problem solver, right? And there's an inclination that I have that is that by the end of a long campaign, I will be great at everything. So my thing is now when I pick a character, I come up with a character concept, I make sure that I am a character with a hammer. And that's all I've got. I've got a hammer and I use it for everything to get myself, a solution and into all kinds of trouble. And I think that in that way keeps me from over the length of time, whether it be short or long, stepping on anyone else's territory in that sense of competency. But the other thing is that it gives me a joyful, antical way to succeed and fail and make it very clear. And even if I am problem-solving driven that day, and some days that's all I kind of could pull together, that's what I'm doing. And I'm doing it badly and well at the same time. So, if I'm not sure of anything else, if I don't know the system, I'm definitely going for the character with the hammer.
Sweet. Yeah. That's awesome. I love that mentality. Like when all you have is a hammer, every problem's a nail, but it makes some other really interesting problems. Patrick, what do you look for?
Invariably, if it's a new system or a new game or a new pick, I look for the wizard of the game. I look for the magic user of the game. And for a long time, that sort of like translated in my head to I don't enjoy mundane games. I don't enjoy real world games. And I've sort of come to realize over time that what I really like about the wizard or the magic user is I like the character that takes a look at the conventions and normal rules of society and the laws of physics and the way everything works and just says, nah, not for me. And just goes another way. And that sort of realization has let me see the wizard in pretty much any system you go to, because he's hiding there somewhere. There's a character there that wants to just cause chaos, touch the things they shouldn't touch, and set things on fire with their mind. Whatever that translates to in your game, there's something there, and those are the ones that draw me first.
Cool. All right, so both of you guys play in a lot of long-term games, something that I haven't done a whole lot of recently. I used to a long time ago. But when you're dealing with those long-term games and characters you develop over a long period of time, how do you feel about maybe like when the characters becomes uninteresting to you, switching characters up and changing things around? This question comes from, again, Adrian Toon about changing characters midstream and things like that. What do you feel about that? And do you have like procedures or things that like maybe you talk about stuff with other people like the GM and so on? Sherri, you want to give us your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've played plenty of games, like 9-year-long campaigns. And it's sort of, there's a part of me that goes, oh, get bored with the character, never. And then I'm like, no, that I'm lying to myself. There are times when you're just like, oh my God, it's total drudge. And you know what I do? And of course, it's easier for me because I'm married to my GM, but I tell my GM, I need a shake up. So something needs to happen to my character that allows me to change, something that I have to react to, in that way. And that is typically how I've handled that situation, is actually to have something that is very impactful happening to my character at that time. And I would think any GM would happily bring that down upon yourself if you asked for that. And that's a way of getting around it. However, I could see the appeal of making a new character in another thing, at which point I would choose an NPC and make it related to, someone I know or something like that. But just ask for trouble.
I'm sure your GM loves that. He's like, yeah, I'll raid down trouble on you. Patrick, what about you?
I definitely agree that for long-term games especially, not necessarily constant, but periodic character reinvention is vital. Because if you're getting bored with your character, it's not long before you're going to get bored with the game and the world around you. Now, that being said, I think there is a very trad game impulse to say it is sacrilege to break the party and get rid of your character and bring in a new one. You're just giving up because you don't care enough about this, or that you're not the right sort of player to play this through to the end. And that's just utter bullshit. And I've seen it be so toxic for a number of games that I've been, where a player is there playing their character because they feel like they need to keep up with this one, and they're getting more and more dissatisfied with their character. They're caring less and less about what their character does and what the game is. And in the worst cases, it can bring down a whole group if someone is just sucking the energy out of the room. And in every case where that has happened, and then the person eventually broke down and decided to change their character, it's just been like a reinvention. It's been like life is shot back into the game and them, and everyone is happy and laughing. So it's such a bad impulse. If you are playing a long-term game, the idea is that this story, this campaign, this setting is interesting. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that your one character makes it all the way from the end from the beginning to the end. You can highlight different interesting parts of the storyline by moving to different characters. And if you are unhappy in a character, just get out. Change over.
Cool. I'm going to roll this right into a question from Pat Perkins, who is asking how to make the most of a game that seems to be going downhill or becoming dull. Because I feel like a lot of these things are going to be the same or similar answers. Because like you were saying, Patrick, is that if you're bored with your character, then you're soon going to get bored with that game. And just like you were saying, Sherri, is just ask the GM to rain down trouble on you and see what comes out. I feel like it's going to be the same thing with the game. Maybe you feel like you're getting bored with the game, but maybe it's that you're bored with the character, and maybe you want to introduce some more chaos or shift things around, or do something like that might kind of make your character change and react a little bit differently to the session that's going or the game that's going on. Do you guys have, Patrick, do you have any other thoughts of maybe something else that might be thrown in there?
I think you can definitely look at a broader definition of character in the game, because there are a lot more characters at the table than just the ones that the players are playing and the NPCs. The location, the setting that you're in is a vital character to the game. The genre and sort of preconceptions that you're playing with are a character to the game. And just like reinventing or changing to a new player character can be important for you as a player, I think shifting up the background conceptions of the game can also breathe new life into it. Like if you've just been going through a long battle-laden adventure slog for the last 6 months of this game, that's fun for a while, but eventually it just becomes boring to wash the blood off and go do it again. But if you then like take that group and put them into a haunted house situation where there's a ghost that they can't battle, or put them into a complicated city and make them do like a mystery investigation and change up the genre, that can bring a whole new thing to it. And you know, as far as like violent examples of changing up the setting, I've been in several games where something apocalyptic would happen to the world, or something would go back and rewrite some bit of history and bring us into a new reality, and suddenly you get the fun of exploring, well, how is this world different from the one that we used to be in when they're the same world? And I think that can bring a lot more energy back into things.
Well, yeah, good ideas. Sherri, how about yourself?
Here's the thing is I've been in campaigns that seem like a slog. And just the thing is, the first thing you do is you have to go, why does it feel like a slog? Is it a slog, or is it like I feel dissatisfied with something? And so I've kind of brought a slog to the table. Once you work through that, have a conversation with your GM. Or just always, it's going to be always the answer. Talk to the people you're playing with. Talk to your GM. And it sounds so simple, but it's so easy when you're playing and you're kind of caught up in that game and in your character and in your obligations in that group, and you forget that it's another person that's sitting there that wants to be having a good time and wants everyone else to be having a good time. And sometimes the GM is suffering under that slog too. They're thinking that they have to do this sloggy thing from, step A to step C instead of just flashing forward, to the scene. And so it's that kind of thing of every once in a while, everyone gets in a rut. It may not just be you feeling it. It might be the GM too, but not sure how to articulate it. So think about what it is that's making it sloggy. Talk to your GM, talk to the other players, whatever, but just sort of get it out there. And chances are things will change.
Super on point observations.
Yeah,
awesome.
It's embarrassing the number of times I've been in a game where everyone was unhappy with element X, but continuing with it because they thought everyone else wanted it.
Yeah. Along those lines is like, what are some of the things that like you see in GMs or other players that like you really love that like, oh, that was a really cool thing. Like, what are those interactions or signposts or flags that you see that, really help draw you in and make things interesting? Patrick, why don't you give us your thoughts?
If it's another player, like, honestly, the basic answer with if it's another player, if it's another GM is I'm selfish and like seeing myself. So if it's another player, I tend to be the sort of chaos monkey of the party. I tend to go in and press the buttons you shouldn't press and make fun of the NPCs and just do generally things that you wouldn't expect. And so, that comes with certain dangers that I sort of accept for my character. So I love seeing when other players do that too. When they make the unwise decision, or when they make the hasty decision because it's so perfectly what their character would do right now, or alternatively because they know that it'll bring something really exciting and fresh to the game session. I love seeing other people doing that because it suddenly makes me feel right at home. Like, oh, I know what's happening. Everything is on fire and in chaos. I love it. For a GM, like I said, it comes down to basically the same thing. What really tells me that I love a GM and that they're engaged with me is when they remember something that my character did or said, like at the beginning of the session, or 3 sessions ago, or 6 months ago, and they bring it back in and make it relevant again. Like there's just that endorphin rush and that giddy little like, oh my fuck, someone else remembered what I said. So that's I like seeing myself.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's awesome. Sherri, you got some thoughts to share with us?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything Patrick said. And I'm going to add to this is that one of the things that I like seeing are other people super enjoying themselves. It's like you almost can't be too pleased and happy and enjoying stuff. I remember sitting down and playing with Magpie GMs. And like they all to a person, they are encouraging you when you say something like, yeah, that's good. Okay. So, and they're excited about it. And that's what I want. I want to be in that circle of excitement. And I want to bring that there, but I also want it to be a circle. Does that make any sense? I love that when another player is echoing that back to me, and I want to be adding to that all the time.
Awesome. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Sort of along those lines of like when you want that circle and not everybody is quite there, we talked about it a little bit, but like what are some ways that you can help bring them into that circle? Maybe if they're a little bit uncomfortable, or if they're not, like maybe they're just out of step. What are some tips or ways that you guys can help bring those people into that circle? Since you were just talking, you want to go for it, Sherri?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I ran into this at a convention one time where the GM was running a lovely game, and I would call it RPG cozy. It was like one of those games where everyone has pets and you're kind of good guys and you're going to solve a problem and you're heroic. And you could tell that from the character things in that. But 3 of the people who sat down at the table were from the D&D, build your character to be optimal and a combat monster. It was completely outside of the thing. And it was like, I remember going, oh my. And the only thing they could do was model sort of enthusiastically that coziness and the joy and pleasure of that, and sort of actually walking over and being sweet about their monstrous wolf animal pets, and being like, oh, who's a good boy? I mean, it was the only thing you could do is sort of pull them into that tone thing. And that was it. It was just one of those things of they were not bad players. They were players who knew that way of playing, and they simply were not ready for that. But they still were combat monsters, but they loved and enjoyed their pets and were, by the end of it. But it was, so I think that's the only thing you can do is grab onto the tone and spread it around the table. If that makes any sense. Awesome advice.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Patrick, you got some other tips there?
I definitely love that, and that really does make a lot of sense. I've had some experience playing with like brand new role players recently, like never played anything sort of thing, and roped me into running a game for people at work. And it's been interesting because much like playing with new people online, I sort of I forget how many assumptions I make about the home group that I play with all the time, and how many times I just assume that someone else is on the same page with me with like the tonal nature of what's going on or what we want out of this game. And so I think it's really important for people that are in a very different headspace than you for the game that you're both supposed to be sharing is to reach out and try and make some concessions with them. Like, okay, in that situation where you have the cute, fuzzy, adorable monster story and people that want to go murder hoboing, like you find some way to bring conflict, even physical conflict, into it, but try and do it on what you think the game's terms are. So like, okay, you guys really want to fight, you really want to adventure, let's bring in some like adorable conflicts. Let's bring in some ways to wrestle and make like the feathers fly in a cute way that we can both get into, because I'll let you use some tactics and really get one over on me, but I'll make sure that it stays in the right tone as we go through it, and I'm not going to let it push too far into bloody violence in this case. And so I think it's very important to try and keep an eye out for what they're responding to, what little seeds they pick up along the way, and be like, okay, well, they want this. How do I make this more like what I think the game is?
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. And sort of along this lines, Blake Ryan asks, how do you encourage players not to play the same personality role every time? I can see that sort of playing with new players, as well as like, how do you encourage people to maybe branch out from what's a little bit uncomfortable to something that maybe is a little bit more adjacent to what the thing that they always are used to doing? what are some ways that you guys can help with that? Sherri, you want to give us your thoughts?
I think one of the things is when you say that there's a player who's playing the same personality over and over again, the thing that you have to recognize is that there's a very particular experience that they want to have and that they're trying to have over and over again. So if you can kind of figure out what it is and deliver it to them, it doesn't matter anymore, and they can get a little bit braver. I think that in some ways there are times and players who so much they want a particular experience and they keep milking the dry cow over and over again, not understanding what it is or why it isn't the way they want. And it's not that they're stupid people. It's just that it's this sort of emotional, like deep down, I didn't even think about it thing. I have a dear friend and she always played a spooky girl for so long. And it was just understanding that she needed to feel special about something that made her different from everyone else. Once she played a girl who was fabulously fashionable, she never needed to play the spooky girl again. And it was just that kind of thing of encouraging those things and going, that experience you want, that thing you feel, you can do that in other ways. And, if you point out that they've got those things or play to them like they're those things that they want, that helps them move along. But it almost takes that as understanding what emotional experience they want.
Again, fantastic observations. That's great advice. Patrick, you got any ideas to add on to that?
That is hard to follow up on. And I'll say my sort of glib answer is when I figure out how to stop playing the wizard, I'll let you know. But I think it's difficult to sort of change someone else's play style without their consent or knowledge or buy-in at some point along the way. So I think especially when someone like even jokingly expresses those sort of feelings of like, oh, look, I'm playing another blah. I think that whole idea of like positive reinforcement and modeling can be really important. If you have like an emotional or even like a romantic game or even just a sub theme in your game, and you have some players that are really uncomfortable with that, like really shy away from anything sort of emotional, I think that sort of modeling of, okay, try and force them into just a very light emotional scene, and when they do anything that references their feelings, like have a huge reaction to it, like laugh or really get into it or be like, oh, that's super awesome, and just really overplay up the things that you want to see out of them or that they've said that they want to see out of themselves, and don't negate other things, but just sort of undersell them a little bit. Be like, oh, okay, that works. Let's move on to this. And so I think just like, for new players, I think modeling the behavior that in this case, I think usually they want to see in themselves is really important.
Awesome. I've got one more question that I kind of want to cover before we get to closing, because I know we're getting close to the end of the hour. So we've been talking a lot about tips and advice and things like that. What's one piece of advice that is out there, you want to improve on, but you just need to working on it for whatever reason or another? Sherri, you want to give us some ideas?
There is a whole just play your character, get out there, that sort of kind of the performance mode of playing a character that I feel led in. When I'm in a game, I don't know how I act. I just feel like I'm led in all the time. And I want to be more free. I want to say and be in that character, like be in it. And I'm still working there. I'm on this trajectory. Like I said, I started full trad, I'm optimized. My vampire will slaughter all other vampires, whatever. I was full on that. And I've moved more towards the story thing, but I am still a work in progress. And I keep trying. And, and you're always going to be a work in progress, right? So, but yes. So I guess the thing is just do what your character, I don't know what they would say. Just trust your other players. Maybe that's it, is that I go, I am so out of kill with what I'm doing that I can't tell. But my other players are awesome. So it's always been a good experience.
Awesome. Good to hear. How about you, Patrick?
I think something that I definitely struggle with in games that I play in and games that I'm starting to run recently is and I think it comes from those years of doing like very traditional games and even more doing very long campaigns, is I have this instinct and love of like digging down into the minutia of a situation, or digging down into the minute by minute of a conversation, or like, how does this next hour play out in great detail? And it can be super fascinating, and it hits really great points in my brain where I'm like, this is great. But it's incredibly counterproductive in a lot of situations, especially Gauntlet style or online play where campaigns are short, or even if you're playing in a long campaign online, the way that being online breaks up your time slot is so limited sometimes that digging down into that can just leave you at the end of the session going, well, we almost made it through the 3 hours in game that we played in real time. Go us. And so that trying to pull myself up out of the minutia of the moment by moment is something that I'm definitely struggling with now.
Yep. Good things to keep in mind. So I've really enjoyed this panel. I've had a ton of fun and found it really informative and really enjoyed talking with you guys. But when we go out, where can people find you guys on social media or other places or anything along those lines? How can people get a hold of you if they wanted to maybe play more games with you? Sherri, you want to give us a little bit of info?
The Gauntlet is easy peasy. And I am on Google Plus, and I'm Ozamel or Sherri Stewart on Google Plus.
Cool. Patrick, how about yourself?
I'm on the Gauntlet a lot, both the G Plus channel and the Slack, and you can find me on G Plus under Patrick Knowles. I may freak out and hide under a rock if a stranger tries to get in touch with me, but I'm trying to moderate those impulses.
Awesome. Yeah, good to hear. I understand that last sentiment. I was just at Big Bad Con recently, and somebody was telling me they heard me from the Mercy Falls podcast, like Pocket Size Play. I'm like, somebody else listened to that and recognizes me from that. But yeah, I'm the same way. So it was interesting. I'm getting over it a little bit. I'm also on Google Plus. I think I'm the only Yoshi Creelman there, so you can just find me there, follow me there. Also, everything, like, we all play in the Gauntlet, and so going to the Gauntlet's hangouts, finding things throughout the year, you can find us as well as many other fantastic players out there. So thank you guys for being on this panel, and thank you all for watching.
A great time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Gauntlet is a vibrant online gaming community. You can find out more at gauntlet-rpg.com or search in Google Plus communities for The Gauntlet. If you like what you heard, you can support us at patreon.com/gauntlet.